Okay, for exercise 1, we're going to be using candle wax, thinking light to dark color mixes. Colors may be combined either on the palette or dropped onto the damp paper. Having the colors mix on the paper creates a more interest in the painting. And I'll identify the colors that I'm using. Think about light, medium, and dark values. As the color mix gets darker, try using less water on your brush. This is the wax shard I have. You want it to be a white color. Once applied, it can't be removed. There is a technique, but we won't talk about that. And candle wax can create a nice texture. Can preserve a light wash that you've put down. You can use it for rocks, trees, maybe some thin grasses, but you want a color wash down first. So first what we're going to do is we're going to do a wet on wet wash. It's a nice day, nice overcast day today. Going to be using a very light value of yellow ochre. I will do little color swatches down here so you can see the value intensity. Trying to get that value right. Okay, probably something right about there. And I'm going to paint that in the area, probably just all over the rocks themselves. Sorry, I needed more paint. Okay, so I'm just going to go. And the other thing I did, if you're a little uncertain about where your light area is, I put little dash lines. That really only works, the dash lines only works if your darker value, as for the shaded side, will be darker than your pencil marks. So keep that in mind. We're going to wait for this wash to dry, and then we're going to put the candle wax down for our next step. Okay, so the first layer has dried, and you can see how much lighter it dried. Now I'm going to take my wax shard, and I'm going to go over the area where I don't want any color to seep in. And you don't want to go over that dotted line because you'll want color there. And it is a little hard. You won't be able to see your candle wax. Even looking at the side, it is slightly shiny. So you could pick it up a little bit from looking at, excuse me, from the side. Now, I've mixed a mixture of, that's burnt sienna and burnt sienna and yellow ochre. I will try wetting it. I only want it wet closest to where the dotted line is because I want it starting to get darker. I'm going to go over that dotted line a little bit so that we can try to not have our paint. Okay, let's see. So I'm just going to go over, and you can see that the paint really isn't adhering to where the wax went down. I'm just trying to get up in there so you can see that. So you can see where the the wax is. And you can paint over the wax because there might be some areas where the wax didn't get into your paper, and it will make a nice, interesting texture. So I'm just bringing down the, I made a couple value changes on the burnt sienna that's a little bit darker. I'm just going to finish up So I'm going to go into that darker value, this one here, and drop in a little bit of color here. No, sorry, Kitty was going to photobomb. So I'm just trying to keep that paint nice and moist for my next layer. Let's try putting a little color up in here and seeing what happens. I did want that to be a little darker in here. So you can see where I'm trying to save the lights. You can see that the wax has resisted in these areas where the color beads up. And then the last mix was the, I'm going to make a medium value. Now burnt sienna and ultramarine blue will make actually a little bit of a brown, depending on how much you get in there of either. So you can play around with that. And see how the dark works really nice next to the light. Trying to make sure these colors bleed up from the bottom, so we're starting to create a little bit of a shadow texture going on. And I'm trying to get it to go around, have my dark values go around the light values. This one will have more ultramarine and less. So that would be really dark. So that has more ultramarine and less burnt sienna. And then what I'm going to do is going to make a mid value between the two that I just put down. Here we go, something like that. And I'm just dotting it in there because remember, rocks are random. You know, they have random colors through them. And I'm kind of trying to watch where it is still wet and just trying to drop in those colors where it's still wet. If you find that your dotted line isn't being covered up and your paint is dry, I would wait until everything's done. Now notice how we're making this line a little jagged. Yeah, rocks are not perfect, right? They're not perfectly round. I'm going in with the darker section now. And you could just, if you wanted to, clean your brush and just go in with ultramarine. It's a little strong if it's just pure squeezed out color, so you might want to temper that a little bit. So this is some old paint that I have. Now you can see the brush is a little too damp there. If your brush is too damp, just go to your sponge and take some of the moisture out of it with your, in the body or the belly of the brush, and then you should be good to go. Okay, so I'm going to come in here because I really want a nice dark element in here around that nice light rock. And then you can go back if you want to and play around with that a little bit. So this is the next one I'm going to do down here. And we're going to do the yellow ochre first on the paper. I need to clean off my palette just a smidge. Quick wipe there. All cleaned up. And so we're doing a wet on wet. So I'm going to go in and yes, I do usually go over it a couple times just so I get a nice glisten. You want a glistening shine before you put that color down. Okay, here's the value I'm putting down, a little bit lighter than the other one. And you can put it down randomly. Let it bleed into other areas. You could pick up a little more, a little bit darker. And you really want your colors to be bleeding into the adjacent value wash, just so that it creates more of a rock texture. Okay, so I'm going to wait for that to dry, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back now. And with the different values of the yellow ochre, you really can't see much color transition there because it's such a light value color in general. So I'm just going to go in and not going with the wax all the way up to the dotted line. Now remember, I put the dotted line in just as a reminder. You could go in randomly if you wanted. So maybe I'll create some random strokes there just so it gives you a little feel. And then here's another area I wanted to have be a light color. So what we're going to do next, you can see it just slightly, the wax against the light when you look sideways. So I'm just touching in a little bit more. And now let's see, our next wash is going to be yellow ochre and cobalt blue. So I am going to continue to wet the area just to keep everything so that you can drop color down and it will meld together nicely. If you feel confident about your quickness of your stroke, you don't have to put water down. I'm just doing this to keep everything moving along. Okay, so I do have a little picture I'm working from also. That always helps. So I am going to mix something that looks a little bit like that. I guess it needs just a tad more blue in it. And I'm looking for the lighter areas, so you can see I put some wax there because the color beads up off of it. This ends up being pretty dark in here. Maybe I'm just going in with some dirty cobalt blue from my palette, and I like the way it spreads out like that. I'm looking at my photo a little bit. I want some blue there. Gets really dark up in here. So you can also use this a little bit as a road map as you're going to be going in with your darker values to remind you where you want your colors to be. That was a tip I got from Ken, putting in a light value or mid value in where you know that later you might want some darker tones. Okay, so I am going to go in with a little bit of a pure cobalt up here as a reminder, and a little bit up in here. So you can see I'm coming around this light shape here, and I want some darkness in here, so this is a little reminder, and some darkness in here, and once again at the bottom of the rock. Up in here. Okay, and then the last one we're doing I think I'll make that a little grayer. So what I'm going to do is go in, I'm drawing the belly of the brush. I picked up some of the yellow ochre, and I'm dropping it on top of the blue, and then I'm going back into the blue just to mix the colors on the palette a little bit. The yellow ochre trying not to get that brush too wet. This is when you have everything already wet on the canvas and you're going in and out of your colors. Make sure you keep an eye on how wet your brush is. Okay, so the last one was a burnt umber that we're going to drop in. So I'm going to pull out a couple value shades of color, and then once again I'm drawing the belly of the brush, going in where I know I want it to be dark with my lighter value of brown. Yeah, I am painting a little bit with the sideways portion of my brush. If you feel that your paints are drying, you can go back in and wet them. Of course, by wetting them, you're diluting then the color. Now that we want to get into our darks, you'll end up diluting your value because your paper is wet. So just a thought process going on here. So the other thing, so I've got some of that burnt umber down. I'm actually going to pick up some more of my blue, knowing I want more depth in places. Dropping the blue in. Now why is she, you're like saying, why is she dropping the blue in there? Well, I'm dropping the blue in just to give it maybe some texture in places, and then also a little reminder that I might want to drop in some more of my burnt umber. So back to the blue, and it's kind of like that value. A little like that. And you're not putting it in all over the place. You're kind of, it's almost a dry brush. So I am doing a little dry brush here. You can try going over the candle section a little bit if you want. Okay, I'm going to clean my brush. You don't have to, but because I'm going into the darker value, this is more of the burnt umber. But remember, it's going into wetness, so it will be lighter. And just the tip of the brush in areas where I really want the light to dark, or the side of the brush like I'm using now. And I'm going to dry the belly of the brush so I get purer color out. Going in with the first quarter of the brush having really much darker values. And squinting and looking, squinting at the photo to find all those darks. Now the other thing you can do, my cobalt got really moist, is you can mix your cobalt with your burnt sienna and get something like that. It's still wet. It's a nice overcast morning today, so I can still see a glisten of moisture, and I'm going to call it good. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, so this one here, I think in areas the edges look a little harsh, so I'm going to take a clear water brush and go in and think about some areas softening, maybe up here where there's more light coming in. I try to make sure I clean my brush in between softenings, or you'll have a little bit of tone left. And I might, later on, I might put a little dark in here. Let's lighten this up a little bit, just to create a softer transition. So I did want a little color on my brush there. Maybe a little color on the brush here, just to create a softening, so that it already has a nicer, softer feel and transition. And if you do go up into the wax, you can see that some of the brown is sitting nicely on top of that and not getting in there, and I kind of like it. So I'm going to leave it.